All right, are you ready for a deep dive into a real classic? We're tackling Great Expectations by Charles Dickens today.
Oh, one of my favorites.
Yeah, I think it's one of those books a lot of people had to read back in school, right?
Definitely a common one.
But it can be a little overwhelming.
It can be. There are a lot of characters and a lot going on.
It's one of those where you kind of need a guide, you know, to help sort it all out.
Well, I'm happy to be your guide today.
Perfect. So let's get right into it. For those who maybe haven't read it in a while or maybe haven't read it at all, where do we even begin with Great Expectations?
Well, we start, of course, with our main character, Pip.
Right, Pip?
And Pip is a young orphan, and he's living in the marshes of Kent. He's living with his sister, who's pretty harsh, and her husband, Joe, who's a blacksmith and a really kind-hearted guy.
Okay, so kind of a rough start for poor Pip.
Yeah, not exactly a life of luxury.
And then things take a turn when he has that, that pretty terrifying encounter in the graveyard.
Oh, yeah, definitely a turning point.
Right. I mean, he runs into, or I guess he doesn't really run into him. He's kind of confronted by this escaped convict, Magwitch.
Right. And Magwitch is a pretty imposing figure. He's demanding, he needs food, he needs help getting that leg iron off.
I always found that scene so creepy as a kid. Could you imagine? Just being a little kid, you're all alone in a graveyard, and suddenly you've got this, like, scary convict demanding things from you.
Dickens is so good at creating that atmosphere, that feeling of dread.
Right, totally.
Yeah.
But Pip, even though he's terrified, he helps him. He helps Magwitch.
He does, and it's an act of kindness that ends up having huge repercussions throughout the story.
Definitely. Okay, so we've got this kind of dark beginning, and then things kind of shift gears when Pip starts visiting Miss Havisham, right?
Yes, exactly. We're in chapter 8 now, and Pip starts going to this big crumbling mansion called Satis House.
Satis House.
Yeah, and he meets Miss Havisham, who is this very wealthy but very mysterious and kind of, well, eccentric woman.
Eccentric is putting it mildly, right?
Well, she does always wear her old wedding dress, and all the clocks are stopped at the exact time she was jilted at the altar.
Oh, yeah, and the whole house is kind of like frozen in time.
Exactly, yeah.
Like a creepy time capsule.
And it's at Satis House that he meets Estella,
Estella.
Miss Havisham's adopted daughter, who Pip immediately develops a massive crush on.
But she's not exactly the warm and fuzzy type.
Not exactly. She's been raised by Miss Havisham to break men's hearts, basically, as a kind of revenge for what happened to her.
Wow, that's rough.
Yeah.
Okay, so poor Pip. He's stuck in this apprenticeship. He's working as a blacksmith with Joe, but he's totally smitten with Estella.
And he gets it in his head that the only way he can be worthy of her is to become a gentleman.
Become a gentleman. Okay, so then we get to chapter 18, right? And things really take a turn.
Yes, chapter 18.
Pip finds out he has a secret benefactor.
A mysterious benefactor who wants to give him a fortune and send him to London to become a gentleman.
A gentleman just like he wants.
Just what he thinks he needs to win Estella's heart.
So of course he thinks.
He thinks it's Miss Havisham.
Right.
Of course that makes sense. Why wouldn't he?
And he doesn't even think twice. He just takes off for London.
He leaves his old life behind. Joe, Betty, everyone.
And he becomes he embraces this whole new life as a gentleman.
Chapters 19 and 20, we see him transforming. New clothes, new friends, a whole new social circle.
But is he really happy?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? Dickens really shows us how easily Pip gets swept up in this world of wealth and status, and how quickly he starts to look down on his old life. He's almost ashamed of Joe.
But then, of course, another huge twist comes along in chapter 39.
Oh, yeah.
He finds out the truth about his benefactor.
And it's not who he thinks it is.
Not Miss Havisham at all.
It's Magwitch.
Magwitch, the convict from the graveyard.
The same one.
I mean, how did Dickens even come up with that?
It's brilliant, right? It totally throws Pip's world upside down.
And Pip's reaction is priceless. I mean, he's horrified. Disgusted, even.
He can't believe it. Everything he thought he knew, all his fancy dreams about being a gentleman and winning over Estella, it all just crumbles.
Because now he's connected to this criminal, this convict.
Right. It's a huge moral dilemma for him.
So what does he do? Does he embrace Magwitch, or does he reject him?
Well, he's torn. He feels like he owes Magwitch something, right? Magwitch helped him, and now Magwitch is in danger.
In danger from,
Compayson?
Compayson. Now, wait a minute. That name rings a bell.
It should.
Oh, right. Isn't that...
Compayson is the man who jilted Miss Havisham years ago. Left her at the altar.
So all these characters, they're all connected somehow.
Exactly.
And wait, what about Estella? How does she fit into all this?
Well, in chapter 42, we find out that Estella is actually Magwitch's daughter.
What?
Yep.
The convict who made Pip a gentleman is the father of the woman he loves. And that same guy is connected to the woman who's been manipulating him this whole time. It's like mind-blowing.
Dickens was a master of weaving these intricate plots, wasn't he?
He really was. So, listener, take a moment and think about this. How does this revelation change your view of Estella? And what about Pip? How is he supposed to reconcile his feelings for her with this truth about her past? We'll dive into all that when we come back, but for now, let's take a quick break. All right, so we left off with that huge revelation about Estella's parentage.
Yeah, quite a twist, right.
Definitely. And it just keeps getting more complicated.
Yeah.
I mean, then you've got Miss Havisham. She starts to feel, I don't know, maybe regret for the way she's treated Estella, and she actually asks Pip for forgiveness.
Chapters 49 and 50, yeah.
It's a pretty powerful moment. I mean, up to this point, she's been so cold and controlling.
Right. But you see that underneath it all, there's this guilt, this pain.
She's been so focused on revenge that she hasn't really considered the damage she's doing.
Exactly. And that theme of manipulation and control, it really runs through the whole story. You
Yeah.
see it with Miss Havisham and Estella, but you also see it in other relationships, too.
It's like this chain reaction almost.
Yeah, and it doesn't really lead to happiness for anyone.
And for Miss Havisham, it ends tragically.
She dies after accidentally setting herself on fire.
I mean, talk about a dramatic ending.
It's almost like her own bitterness consumed her.
Right. And then Estella, well, she doesn't exactly find happiness either.
Oh, she ends up marrying this really cruel, wealthy man named Drummle.
Poor Pip.
I know, it's like all his hopes and dreams are just crashing down around him.
He's so fixated on Estella that he doesn't really see her for who she is.
And he can't see that Drummle. He's everything wrong with the upper class, the very class Pip has been trying so hard to join.
It's like Dickens is saying that wealth and status don't necessarily equal happiness.
Definitely a theme he explores throughout the book.
So now we're getting into the final part of the story. Magwitch is trying to escape England,
Right. And Pip is helping him.
even though it puts him at risk. Chapters 53 and 54, those are so suspenseful.
Oh, they really are. The tension just builds and builds.
You've got the fog, the darkness, the river, and then that confrontation with Compeyson.
Yeah, Compeyson shows up. There's this fight. They end up in the water.
Yeah.
Compeyson grounds, but Magwitch is captured.
Oh, no.
He's sentenced to death.
It's like Pip loses everything.
He does. His fortune, his dreams of being with Estella, and now Magwitch.
Just a real low point for him.
And it's also kind of a wake-up call, I think.
In what way?
He finally starts to see the emptiness of all those things he's been chasing. All the wealth, the status. It hasn't brought him any real happiness.
So he goes back to Kent.
Yeah, chapters 56 and 57. He's sick. He's lost everything. He's a shadow of his former self.
And Joe takes him in.
Joe's always there for him, no matter what.
Even after Pip treated him so poorly.
It's true forgiveness.
And it shows the importance of those real, genuine connections.
Something Pip had forgotten about for a while.
And what about the other characters? Joe and Biddy.
Well, they've gotten married.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, they found happiness in a simpler life.
So there's some hope there. But what about Pip? What does he do?
He leaves England, starts a new life abroad with his friend Herbert.
So he doesn't get the girl. He doesn't go back to being a blacksmith.
Nope, not exactly the fairy tale ending you might expect.
But it feels real. You know, life doesn't always tie up neatly.
Exactly.
And then, of course, there's that ending. Years later, Pip goes back to Satis House.
And he runs into Estella.
Who's a widow now.
She's changed, though.
How so?
She's not cold and heartless anymore. She's softer, more humble.
So is there a chance for them now?
Well, Dickens leaves it open to interpretation. They walk off together, but we don't know what happens next.
It's one of those endings that makes you think, wow. I mean, think about everything Pip went through, all in just this one story.
It's amazing how much Dickens packed into Great Expectations, right?
It is. And I'm curious, what do you think, listener? What stood out to you most about Pip's journey? Was it his ambition, his struggles with, class and society, or maybe that realization that happiness comes from connection, from kindness?
I think what always gets me about Great Expectations is that it's about so much more than just a guy trying to, climb the social ladder. It's about all these deeper things we all wrestle with: ambition, guilt, love, forgiveness, the whole human experience.
And you can't forget Dickens' social commentary. It's not just a story. It's like he's holding up a mirror to society, showing us the good, the bad, and the, really ugly sometimes.
Yeah, like with the whole idea of what it means to be a gentleman. Pip thinks it's about money and status, but he learns it's really about character, about integrity. Like Joe, you know?
Yeah, Joe. He's the real gentleman in the story.
Exactly. He might be a simple blacksmith, but he's got more heart than all those fancy folks in London put together.
Definitely. And Dickens really makes you think about how our choices affect not just ourselves, but everyone around us.
Oh, absolutely. Like with Pip and Magwitch and Miss Havisham and Estella, they're all connected in these like crazy ways.
It's like this big web, and one little tug can change everything. Makes you wonder, how our own actions ripple outward, how they touch other people's
It
lives.
is pretty profound, isn't it?
It is. I think
Mhm.
we've given our listeners a pretty good overview of Great Expectations.
We've covered a lot of ground, that's for sure.
We have. But there's always more to uncover, more to think about.
Dickens is one of those authors you can reread a dozen times and still find something new, something you missed before.
Totally. So, listener, if you haven't read Great Expectations lately, or maybe ever, I highly recommend checking it out. And even if you have, it might be time for a revisit. You never know what you might discover this time around.
It's a classic for a reason.
It is. And that's a wrap on our deep dive into Great Expectations. Thanks for joining us.